At 4:17 local time, the Combat Information Center aboard the USS Mason went silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then the radar picture changed. 3 surface contacts appeared northeast of the American formation, moving through the dark waters of the Strait of Hormuz, with no AIS signal, no declared route, and no response to international bridge-to-bridge calls. At first, they could have been mistaken for ordinary traffic in one of the most tense maritime corridors on Earth. Tankers passed through here, patrol craft passed through here, shadows moved through here. But these contacts were not drifting. They were closing in. Inside the CIC, blue light reflected across the faces of watch officers as the Aegis system began sorting the picture. Bearings tightened, speeds changed. One contact jumped from 12 knots to 26 in less than 3 minutes. Another moved wide to the south, cutting across the projected path of the American convoy. The third stayed back, holding distance like an observer feeding the picture. The tactical action officer leaned closer to his screen. Track 061, possible surface combatant, bearing northeast, closing fast. On the bridge, the captain of the USS Mason did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Set condition 1, log everything. Across the destroyer, alarms moved through steel passageways. Red lights pulsed. Sailors shifted from routine watch to battle stations with the speed that only repetition creates. Hatches sealed, damage control lockers opened. Defensive teams took their positions. Deep inside the ship, the vertical launch system waited beneath armored covers, silent and ready. Outside, the Strait of Hormuz was still dark. The Iranian coastline sat somewhere beyond the horizon. Tanker lights flickered far off to starboard. The sea looked calm, but every screen aboard Mason said otherwise. The first hail went out at 4:19. Unidentified naval vessel, this is a United States warship operating in international waters. You are closing distance at high speed. Alter course immediately. No answer. A second hail followed. Same message, same silence. Then the P-8 Poseidon, operating south of the formation, sent a short encrypted update. Electronic emissions detected. Naval radar. Chinese signature. Active sweep. That changed the room. The contacts were no longer unknown. The lead ship was assessed as a Chinese Type 052D guided missile destroyer. Behind it, a Type 054A frigate. The smaller contact remained harder to classify, but its behavior was clear. It was not fishing. It was not simply transiting. It was helping shape the approach. At 4:21, Mason's SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite caught a sharper signal. The electronic warfare officer turned from his display. Fire control illumination, bearing 061. That was the line. Search radar meant they were watching. Fire control radar meant they were aiming. The captain stepped into the Combat Information Center. Around him, every console now held a piece of the same answer. The Chinese destroyer had locked onto an American warship in the Strait of Hormuz. "Maintain course," he said. "Weapons tight. Prepare defensive engagement." No one spoke more than necessary. Mason transmitted one final warning. "Chinese naval vessel, you are illuminating a United States warship with fire control radar. Cease immediately. Alter course." For 3 seconds, nothing changed. Then the warning came. "Vampire. Vampire, Vampire, missile launch, bearing 061. On radar, a fast-moving contact separated from the Chinese destroyer and dropped low over the water. Sea skimming profile, high speed, direct approach. Mason did not hesitate. Aegis took the track, classified the threat, calculated the intercept path, and passed the solution to the weapons team within seconds. Below deck, a vertical launch cell opened. SM-2 away. The interceptor erupted from the destroyer in a column of fire, climbing hard into the night before turning toward the incoming threat. For a moment, the only visible sign of the engagement was a bright white spear rising above black water. Inside CIC, nobody watched the sky. They watched the math. Range closing. Intercept window tightening. Then the screen flashed. Splash 1. The incoming missile vanished from radar several miles short of the American formation. But the relief lasted less than 5 seconds. Multiple launches, 4 additional vampires, low altitude, multiple bearings. The Chinese had not sent a warning. They had opened with a full salvo. The Type 052D pushed another missile off its deck. The frigate behind it lit up with supporting radar. The smaller vessel to the north began transmitting, possibly relaying targeting data. What had looked like a close approach had become something far more serious, a coordinated strike pattern. Mason's electronic warfare systems came alive. Chaff launched into the darkness, spreading metallic clouds across the air. The destroyer's radar locked, tracked, and prioritized. Another SM-2 left the cells, then an ESSM, then another. Across the ship, sailors braced against bulkheads as the hull vibrated with each launch. The forward gun remained trained but silent. CIWS mounts rotated, waiting for anything that slipped through the outer layers. One incoming missile vanished beneath radar clutter, flying so low it blended with the sea return. For one long second, the screen lost it. Then CIWS found it. The close-in weapon system spun up with a violent metallic roar, sending a wall of rounds into the night. The missile broke apart just off the bow, close enough for sailors inside the ship to feel the dull impact through the deck plates. Still, no one celebrated. The engagement was not over. At 4:23, USS Mason remained afloat, undamaged, and on course. But every officer aboard understood what had just happened. China had launched first. And when a United States warship is targeted in the Strait of Hormuz, the response does not arrive as a warning. It arrives as a system waking up. At 4:24 local time, the Strait of Hormuz stopped being a transit lane. It became a high-risk battle space. Mason had already defeated the first wave, but the radar picture was getting worse, not better. 4 hostile tracks were still inbound. 2 came low from the northeast. 1 was cutting in from the east. The last moved strangely, dropping and rising in broken intervals. Possibly a decoy, possibly a drone, possibly something designed to make Aegis waste a shot. Inside the Combat Information Center, nobody guessed. They classified. Track 182, Sea Skimmer, hostile. Track 184, probable anti-ship missile. Track 186, unknown profile, holding. Track 187, fast inbound, low altitude. The tactical action officer stood over the console, eyes fixed on the screen. Around him, Mason's crew moved in controlled bursts, short commands, clean confirmations, no wasted words. The ship was under pressure, but the rhythm inside CIC stayed disciplined. That was the difference. Panic burns time, training saves it. Mason's Aegis system was already linking with the rest of the American formation. To the west, USS Princeton brought its spy radar fully into the network. To the south, USS Bainbridge shifted course to widen the defensive angle. A support ship at the rear of the formation began turning away, increasing distance from the threat axis. The formation was no longer moving like separate ships. It was moving like one organism. At 4:25, Princeton called in. Shared track confirmed. Weapons free on hostile inbound. Seconds later, another interceptor left an American vertical launch cell. Then another. White fire punched into the dark sky, curved hard, and disappeared toward the incoming Chinese salvo. The first intercept came high. A flash above the waterline, then a second, then a third. Each appeared on radar as a brief bloom of debris before fading back into static. But one hostile track kept coming. It had slipped beneath the cleanest radar picture, riding close to the surface and using the sea itself as cover. Mason's electronic warfare team reacted first. Deploy chaff. On deck, canisters launched into the night. Thin metallic strips burst into the air, creating false radar reflections that drifted like ghost ships. To a missile seeker, the cloud looked like a target. To the American operators, it was simply another tool. Not dramatic, not desperate, necessary. The incoming missile bent slightly. Not enough. CIWS standby. The forward close-in weapon system rotated toward the threat. Its radar locked, its barrels spun. Inside the ship, sailors felt the vibration before they heard the sound. A hard, tearing roar moved through the steel as the system engaged. The last missile broke apart short of the bow, scattering fragments into the water. Mason was still untouched, but the Chinese move was changing shape. At 4:27, a small aerial contact appeared north of the formation. Slow, low, steady, too small for a manned aircraft, too deliberate for clutter. Possible UAV relay. The P-8 Poseidon reported from the south. Bearing 014, altitude low, tracking toward formation. That explained the spread. The Chinese were not just launching missiles. They were feeding targeting data into the approach from multiple angles. Surface ships, radar emissions, and an airborne relay were working together to tighten the pressure around the American convoy. The Seahawk helicopter, already airborne from Mason, banked hard north. Its crew was not chasing glory, they were chasing confirmation. At 200 feet above the water, the MH-60R skimmed over the dark surface, nose sensor locked forward. Inside the cabin, the operator brought the thermal image onto his screen. A small unmanned aircraft appeared as a pale shape against the colder sky. Visual on UAV, no civilian traffic nearby. Back in CIC, the order came clean. Neutralize relay of hostile control confirmed. The Seahawk held distance while Bainbridge took the shot. A short-range interceptor climbed out, corrected once, and struck the UAV before it could push targeting data deeper into the formation. Relay down. No celebration. The Chinese destroyer answered by increasing radar output. Mason's SLQ-32 suite caught the spike immediately. Stronger emissions, narrower beam. The Type 052D was trying to rebuild the targeting picture after losing its airborne node. The move was aggressive, but still short of another launch. The captain watched the track. Hold fire unless they shoot again. That restraint mattered. In Hormuz, one careless decision could turn a naval engagement into something far larger than anyone intended. But restraint did not mean weakness. Every American ship in the formation was now aimed, networked, and ready. At 4:29, the Chinese frigate shifted south, trying to cross the projected path of the support vessel behind Mason. It was a pressure maneuver, not a launch, not yet, but it forced the American formation to divide attention. Princeton solved it with positioning. She turned just enough to open her defensive arc, placing herself between the frigate and the support ship. Her radar stayed locked, her missiles stayed ready. The message was clear without a single word. Come closer and you enter the envelope. At 4:31, the radar picture finally began to stabilize. The first missile wave was gone. The UAV relay was down. The Chinese formation had lost its clean approach geometry, but the threat was not over. The Type 052D was still active. The frigate was still maneuvering. The smaller vessel continued transmitting in short bursts. Then an encrypted message arrived from higher command. Brief, direct, no speech, no politics. Carrier air wing authorized. Large response package preparing. Inside CIC, the tactical action officer read it once and looked back at the screen. Mason had absorbed the first move. The formation had held. Now the fight was about to move beyond defense. China had opened with missiles in the Strait of Hormuz. America was about to answer with the one thing no Navy wants to see arriving over the horizon. At 4:32 local time, the engagement moved beyond USS Mason. The first phase had been survival. The second was control. Now the third began. 200 miles southeast of the Strait of Hormuz, the flight deck of a United States aircraft carrier snapped into motion. Yellow shirts pointed. Green shirts crouched beside launch gear. Red shirts moved ordnance beneath the wings of waiting aircraft. Steam rolled across the deck in white sheets as the first catapult came alive. No speeches, no confusion. Just machinery, muscle memory, and orders moving faster than fear. The carrier strike group had been watching since the first Chinese radar lock. It had seen the missile launches. It had seen the UAV relay go down. It had seen the Type 052D try to rebuild its targeting picture after the American defensive screen broke apart the first salvo. Now, the response package was authorized, and it was massive. The first aircraft off the deck was not a fighter. It was an E-2D Advanced Hawkeye. The twin turboprop command aircraft rolled forward, locked into the catapult, and launched into the dark sky with its radar dome turning above the fuselage. Its job was simple and enormous. See everything, sort everything, connect everything. 30 seconds later, the first EA-18G Growler launched, then a second, then two F/A-18E Super Hornets, then four more. Within minutes, the carrier was no longer just a ship. It was the center of a moving battle network stretching across the Gulf of Oman and into the narrow waterway where Mason was still holding the line. At 4:36, the Hawkeye climbed through 12,000 feet and opened its radar picture. The strait appeared on its display like a living map. American ships in blue, Chinese contacts in red, civilian traffic pushed away from the center line, unknown electronic signals blinking in short bursts along the northern edge. The Hawkeye crew began assigning the sky. Growler flight, push west, establish electronic screen, Super Hornet flight, hold outside threat envelope, surface group shared track data active. No one rushed. The goal was not to charge into the strait. The goal was to control it. At 4:38, the Growlers reached their line and began working. Electronic warfare does not look dramatic from a distance. There is no fireball, no visible blast, no thunder rolling across the water. But inside enemy systems, it creates chaos. The Chinese radar picture began to bend. Returns duplicated. Ranges shifted. Altitudes ghosted. The Type 052D sensors started seeing things that were not there and losing things that were. On board Mason, the SLQ-32 suite confirmed the change. Hostile fire control radar degraded. The captain heard it, nodded once, and kept his eyes on the tactical display. Hold posture. Do not chase. That was the discipline. The Chinese had launched first. The Americans were not going to answer with emotion. They were going to answer with architecture. Aegis destroyers, carrier aircraft, maritime patrol sensors, electronic warfare platforms, and command aircraft were now locked into one system. Mason could see what the Hawkeye saw. Princeton could engage what Mason tracked. Bainbridge could receive a targeting picture from an aircraft 100 miles away. This was the part no opposing Navy wanted to face. Not one American ship. Not one American aircraft. A network. At 4:41, the smaller Chinese vessel north of the formation transmitted again. A short directional burst, likely an attempt to pass updated targeting data back to the destroyer. The Hawkeye marked it. The P-8 Poseidon confirmed the emission. A growler answered. The signal vanished beneath a blanket of interference. Seconds later, the smaller vessel changed course, no longer feeding clean data into the Chinese formation. Inside the Chinese approach pattern, the lines were collapsing. The Type 054A frigate tried to compensate by increasing radar output. That only made it easier to find. The emissions lit up across American sensors like a flare in the dark. Every frequency, every pulse pattern, every search mode was recorded. The Chinese were trying to regain vision. Instead, they were handing over fingerprints. At 4:44, the Super Hornets moved closer. They stayed outside the immediate missile envelope, flying clean, fast, and quiet. Their radars remained controlled. Their passive sensors did the work. Heat signatures, surface movement, radar emissions, launch angles, everything fed back into the battle network. Then the Chinese destroyer made its next mistake. Its fire control radar came back up, narrow beam, strong, directed toward the American surface group. Inside Mason's CIC, the warning tone sounded again. Fire control illumination, same bearing, hostile emitter active. This time, the answer did not come from Mason alone. The Hawkeye confirmed the source. The Growlers shaped the corridor. Princeton locked the track. The Super Hornets shifted into position. The order came through the network. Disable hostile targeting capability. Not sink the ship. Not escalate beyond control. Disable the hand reaching for the trigger. At 4:46, a precision weapon separated from a Super Hornet and dropped into the dark. It did not streak across the sky like something from a movie. It moved with cold purpose, guided by coordinates, sensor data, and a clean solution built by half a dozen American platforms working together. The weapon struck the Chinese destroyer's forward sensor array. A sharp flash lit the horizon. No massive secondary event, no catastrophic scene, just the sudden disappearance of the radar beam that had been pointed at American ships. Inside CIC, the report came flat. Hostile emitter down. Still, no one celebrated. The Chinese formation was still armed. At 4:48, the Hawkeye updated the entire force. Enemy targeting network degraded. Surface group remains hostile. Continue defensive posture. Mason held course. The carrier air wing held station. The Growlers kept the strait wrapped in electronic pressure. And for the first time since the engagement began, China no longer controlled the pace. What started as an ambush had become a demonstration. The United States had not released one overwhelming blow. It had released something more effective, a battle network built to absorb the first punch, blind the attacker, and decide exactly what happened next. At 4:49 local time, the Chinese formation began to lose shape. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough for American operators to see it. The Type 052D destroyer, still holding northeast of USS Mason, reduced speed by 3 knots. The Type 054A frigate behind it shifted south, then corrected back east, as if its helm orders no longer matched the tactical picture on its bridge. The smaller relay vessel that had been sending bursts of targeting data went quiet, its emissions buried under growler jamming and American signal interference. Inside Mason's Combat Information Center, the change appeared as geometry. Attack lines widened, bearing rates slowed, radar beams weakened. The Chinese pressure pattern was coming apart. Mason's captain stood behind the tactical action officer, watching the red tracks drift out of alignment. He did not call it victory. He did not call it over. In naval combat, the most dangerous opponent is often the one that has just realized the first plan failed. Maintain defensive posture, he said. Weapons tight, watch for another launch. Across the American formation, the order moved instantly. Princeton held her air defense arc. Bainbridge maintained separation from the support ship. The carrier aircraft remained outside the tightest threat envelope, close enough to respond, far enough to preserve escalation control. Above the strait, the E-2D Hawkeye kept the entire battle space stitched together. Chinese destroyer still active, frigate maneuvering, no new missile launch, multiple degraded emissions. The Growlers stayed on station. Their work was invisible, but the effect was everywhere. The Chinese radar picture had become unreliable. What their sensors saw, they could no longer fully trust. False returns appeared and vanished. Ranges shifted. Data links dropped. A ship built to fight with missiles and sensors was now being forced to fight through uncertainty. That was the turning point. Not the flash on the horizon, the confusion. At 4:52, the Type 054A frigate tried to push back into the fight. Its radar came up in a broad search pattern, sweeping the surface group and the aircraft overhead. The signal was strong enough to be detected by every American electronic warfare receiver in the area. On board Mason, the EW officer marked it immediately. Frigate radar active, search mode only, no fire control lock. The captain waited. Search mode was not enough. The U.S. Navy had already been targeted, but the response still followed rules. Every action had to match the threat. Every shot had to be tied to hostile behavior. That discipline was not hesitation, it was control. At 4:54, the Chinese destroyer made the next mistake. Its damaged forward sensor array was down, but secondary fire control equipment came online from aft. The beam was weaker, narrower, unstable, but it was still pointed toward the American surface group. The warning tone sounded again inside CIC. Fire control illumination, hostile emitter reacquired. The room tightened. This was no longer posturing. The Type 052D had already launched missiles. It had already locked an American destroyer. Now it was trying to restore its ability to launch again. The Hawkeye confirmed the source. The Growlers shifted their jamming pattern. Princeton locked the track. A Super Hornet flight orbiting outside the threat ring received the tasking order: suppress hostile targeting system. The aircraft did not dive low. It did not perform a dramatic move for the camera. It stayed high, fast, and controlled, using the network instead of bravado. The weapon came off clean, guided by a firing solution built from ship radar, airborne sensors, and electronic signatures collected in real time. At 4:56, the strike landed. A white flash snapped across the Chinese destroyer's superstructure. The aft targeting emitter disappeared from the spectrum. No massive fireball, no sinking ship, just the precise removal of the system that had been reaching for another shot. Inside Mason, the call came flat. Hostile emitter down, no secondary launch detected. Still no cheering, because the frigate was moving again. The Type 054A accelerated, cutting across the eastern edge of the battle space. Its course suggested one of two things. Either it was screening the damaged destroyer, or it was preparing its own launch window. Mason did not wait for intent to become surprise. Track and hold, the captain ordered. Aegis assigned the frigate. Princeton took the air picture. Bainbridge shifted 2 degrees to open her firing arc. Above them, the Super Hornets adjusted position while the Growlers kept pressure on the frigate's sensors. For 90 seconds, nothing launched. That was the longest minute of the engagement. Then the frigate's deck signature changed. A hot plume appeared on infrared. Possible launch preparation. The next call came almost immediately. Missile launch, single Vampire, bearing 078. The Chinese frigate had launched. This time, the American system was waiting. The missile came low, fast, and alone. A final attempt to force the U.S. formation to break. Mason tracked it. Princeton confirmed it. Bainbridge received the shared track and launched. SM-2 away. The interceptor climbed into the pale edge of dawn, arced east, and met the incoming missile before it could enter its final profile. The flash lit the horizon for half a second, then vanished into smoke and falling fragments. The frigate did not launch again. At 5:02, the Chinese destroyer began turning east, slowly at first, then with commitment. The frigate followed, placing itself between the damaged destroyer and the American formation. The smaller relay vessel moved north, no longer transmitting. The Chinese group had not been wiped out, but it had lost the fight that mattered. It had lost initiative. At 5:07, the Hawkeye transmitted the update every American ship had been waiting for. Chinese surface group opening distance. No active fire control emissions, no inbound threats. Maintain watch. Mason stayed on course. Her crew remained at battle stations. Her systems stayed ready. The Strait of Hormuz was not calm, not yet. But the direction of the battle had changed completely. China had launched first. By 5:07, America controlled every second that followed. At 5:08 local time, the Strait of Hormuz went quiet again. Not peaceful, quiet. There is a difference. The Chinese surface group was opening distance to the east. The Type 052D destroyer moved slower now, its damaged sensor arrays no longer sweeping the American formation. The Type 054A frigate held a screening position behind it, still armed, still dangerous, but no longer pressing forward. The smaller relay vessel had turned north, its transmissions reduced to short, broken pulses. Inside USS Mason's Combat Information Center, nobody stood down. Not yet. The screen still glowed red and blue in the dim light. The air still carried the low hum of cooling electronics and ventilation fans. Watch officers tracked every bearing change, every speed adjustment, every signal that flickered from the Chinese ships as they pulled away. The captain remained behind the tactical action officer. "Maintain condition 1, he said. "Keep the air picture clean." Outside, dawn was beginning to break over the strait. The first gray light cut across the water, revealing smoke trails that had not fully disappeared. Thin black lines hung above the sea where missiles had flown minutes earlier. Farther east, a faint haze marked the direction of the Chinese formation. Mason held course. That mattered. She had been locked by fire control radar. She had been targeted. She had fought through a coordinated missile engagement in one of the narrowest and most strategic waterways on Earth, and she had not turned back. To the west, USS Princeton continued to hold her radar posture. USS Bainbridge maintained position near the rear of the formation. The support ship, protected through the entire fight, kept moving under escort. Above them, the E-2D Hawkeye remained on station, its radar dome turning steadily against the brightening sky. The carrier aircraft did not leave. The Growler stayed wide, keeping pressure on the electromagnetic spectrum. The Super Hornets circled outside the threat envelope, fuel managed, weapons ready, sensors watching. The P-8 Poseidon continued its patrol to the south, recording the aftermath from above. The engagement had ended. The mission had not. At 5:14, the Hawkeye transmitted a full update. No inbound threats, no active fire control emissions. Chinese group continuing east, recommend continued armed overwatch. The answer came back immediately. Approved. There was no victory speech, no dramatic radio call, no warning shouted across open frequencies. The United States Navy did not need to tell the Chinese ships what had happened. The radar record already did. Every launch had been captured. Every missile track had been reconstructed. Every Chinese emission had been logged, time-stamped, geolocated, and stored. The fire control locks, the UAV relay, the attempt to rebuild targeting after the first strike, the final missile launch from the frigate. It was all there, not as opinion, as evidence. Inside Mason, intelligence teams began copying data from combat systems into secure storage. Electronic warfare officers labeled signal patterns. Radar operators marked engagement timelines. Weapons teams confirmed expenditure logs. Damage control teams reported no hull breach, no fire, no flooding, and no personnel hurt. The ship had been targeted. The ship was still fully mission capable. That was the message. At 5:22, the first internal report moved up the chain. USS Mason remains operational. No damage, no personnel injuries, multiple hostile missiles intercepted, enemy targeting systems degraded, U.S. formation continuing transit. It read like a routine update, but there was nothing routine about it. A Chinese naval group had tried to turn the Strait of Hormuz into a trap. It had used missile launches, electronic targeting, surface maneuvering, and an airborne relay to compress the American formation into a dangerous engagement zone. For a few minutes, the pressure looked strong enough to change history. Then the American system woke up. Aegis absorbed the first salvo. Electronic warfare blinded the network. Seahawk sensors confirmed the relay. Hawkeye stitched the battlespace together. Growlers distorted the enemy radar picture. Super Hornets removed the targeting systems. American destroyers held the line. Not one piece won the fight. The network did. That was what China had underestimated. They were not facing a single destroyer in the dark. They were facing a carrier strike group connected across sea and sky by radar, satellite, aircraft, and command links. Every hostile move created data. Every radar ping revealed a weakness. Every missile launch gave the Americans a clearer picture of how the operation was built. By 5:37, the Chinese formation was outside immediate engagement range. Mason still did not celebrate. Sailors remained at their stations. The captain ordered a full systems check. Weapons crews verified launch status. Engineers inspected vibration stress from interceptor launches and close-in defensive fire. Medical teams remained ready even though no emergency call had come. That was how the Navy handled survival. Not with cheering, with procedure. At 5:46, the strait began returning to motion. Civilian vessels that had held away from the center of the engagement resumed cautious movement under distant watch. Tankers adjusted course. Merchant captains asked for updates. The American formation transmitted only what was necessary. U.S. naval vessels conducting lawful transit maintained safe distance. No extra words, no theatrics, just control. By 6 o'clock, the sun had cleared the horizon. The black water of Hormuz turned steel blue. On Mason's deck, sailors could see the last fragments of smoke dissolving into the morning air. Somewhere beyond the eastern horizon, the Chinese ships were still moving away. They had entered the strait expecting to test the U.S. Navy. What they found was a machine built for exactly the moment they created. So here is the question. If a Chinese warship launches first against the U.S. Navy in the Strait of Hormuz, should America stop after disabling the threat? Or should it answer with overwhelming force? Drop your take in the comments. Because out here, restraint is not weakness, it is control. And when that control is backed by the full weight of American naval power, the other side usually learns one lesson very quickly. Do not make the first move unless you are ready for everything that wakes up after.